Archaeologists have just made a stunning discovery, a previously unknown 3,500-year-old city hidden in Peru. But while this one site may not rewrite history on its own, it's part of a much bigger pattern that absolutely could, because what we're seeing is a more advanced, more interconnected, more ancient South America than we'd ever imagined, and that impacts everything we think we know about early civilization. Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Michael. I have a degree in ancient history, and on this channel, we discuss the unexplainable mysteries of our past. Let's get into it. In Peru, just north of Lima, in the dusty hills of the Barranca province, something remarkable has been uncovered. 2 weeks ago, archaeologists revealed a buried 3,500-year-old city known as Penico. Nestled between the Andes, the Pacific coast, and the fringe of the Amazon, this site sits at a natural crossroads, and what they found there is stunning. 18 distinct structures, including a sunken circular plaza, ceremonial buildings, homes, and finely crafted artifacts. But these aren't rough shelters. No, this is a sophisticated, organized urban space. Some walls are etched with reliefs, including remarkable depictions of a ceremonial conch-shell trumpet. This hints at a ritual culture steeped in symbolism. Other finds include seashell and bead necklaces, animal figurines, and decorative ceramics, suggesting the society engaged in long-distance trade. In fact, Penico appears to have been a vibrant trade and cultural nexus, one that possessed a rich cultural identity. Radiocarbon dating places the site between 1800 and 1500 BC. But this isn't just another ruin, it's further evidence that complex urban life, ritual ceremony, and interregional exchange were already flourishing in the Americas, thousands of years earlier than was traditionally thought. But this date, roughly 1800 BC, is very interesting, because it's right around the time another culture, the Caral-Supe civilization, was in decline. And that's fascinating, because Penico likely represents a continuation of that tradition, a forgotten link in a chain stretching back deep into South America's ancient past. And it's opening a door onto a chapter of history that's only just beginning to be understood. What makes Penico so intriguing is just how closely it echoes the earlier culture of Caral-Supe, otherwise known as Norte Chico, the oldest known civilization in the Americas. This civilization dates back to around 3,500 BC and stunned the world when it was first excavated, revealing cities, pyramids, plazas, and astronomical alignments, thousands of years earlier than anything like it on the continent. Like Penico, Caral featured evidence of complex ritual life, centered around music, fire, and sound. But here's the thing, Caral fell into decline precisely around 1800 BC, just as Penico began to rise. That overlap is no coincidence. It suggests a passing of the torch, migration, cultural succession, or a deliberate continuation of sacred traditions. This wasn't a one-off experiment in civilization that suddenly collapsed. No, it looks more like a system adapting, relocating, and rebuilding. The architectural similarities are striking, almost as if the same blueprint was reused. Both show evidence of wide-scale trade, shared iconography, and central planning, hallmarks of a culture that didn't just vanish, but evolved. This raises a profound question. What if Caral wasn't a lonely outlier, but part of a much longer, richer, older tradition of complex Andean society? In just the past few decades, our understanding of ancient South America has undergone a complete transformation. For much of modern archaeology, the prevailing belief was that civilization in this part of the world developed relatively late, with the Inca Empire as its first true, large-scale expression of complexity. But that idea is rapidly collapsing. The discovery of Caral in the early 2000s pushed the timeline for city building in South America back to earlier than 3000 BC, almost 1000 years older than the Egyptian pyramids. Then came Sichin Banho, Banduria, El Paraíso, all showing monumental architecture and urban planning stretching back thousands of years. Now with Penico, we have another part of the puzzle, further evidence that civilization here was more widespread, complex, and older than we'd thought. But even more radically is what we've also just found in the nearby Amazon rainforest. Once thought to be untouched wilderness, it's now revealing traces of massive ancient settlement. LiDAR scans over regions of Peru, Brazil, and Bolivia have uncovered vast networks of geometric earthworks, roads, canals, causeways, and even evidence of pre-planned cities arranged in symbolic layouts. Some of these sites may have been home to tens of thousands of people. Lost civilizations of the Amazon were always dismissed as myth, but now they are becoming reality. Add to that the discovery of engineered Terra Preta soils, dark earths deliberately created to support intensive agriculture, and the picture becomes undeniable. The Amazon was not a pristine jungle. It was a human-shaped landscape, full of cities, life, and civilization. So from the Pacific coast to the high Andes to the heart of the rainforest, a new vision of ancient South America is emerging. One of interlinked, complex societies, building, trading, organizing, and thriving thousands of years earlier than we thought. But there's another, darker reason this picture is only just emerging now. And it's not about time or technology, it's about something a lot more sinister. Tragically, much of South America's history is missing, and not due to time, but because it was deliberately erased. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they didn't just conquer the land, they wiped it clean. Entire cultures were dismantled, oral traditions were silenced, cities were looted and burned. Indigenous knowledge systems, cosmologies, sciences, languages were suppressed or destroyed in the name of Christianity and empire. The conquistadors weren't just uninterested in the past, they were actively hostile to it. They saw the ruins not as legacies to be preserved, but as threats to be crushed or converted. And so, the true scale of what came before the Inca was lost, buried beneath jungle, rubble, and dogma. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where records survived in stone and scripts, South America's history was mostly preserved in living memory, and that memory was targeted for extinction. That's why what we're uncovering now feels so revelatory. It's not just archaeology, it's recovery. A slow process of unerasing a past that was never meant to be remembered. It's for this reason, among others, that the history of South America is steeped in so much mystery. But while tragic, it's also fascinating, because I feel we're only beginning to attempt to understand the deep, complex history of the region, and there's a lot more mystery left to be uncovered. But here's the strange thing. We always used to be taught that civilization began in Mesopotamia or Egypt, but Caral-Supe in Peru is just as old and arguably even more mysterious. Its date of roughly 3000 BC means it sits on the exact same timeline as Egypt's Old Kingdom and the early Sumerian cities. In other words, while the so-called cradles of civilization were rising in the old world, something equally complex was taking shape on the far side of the planet, with supposedly no contact, no known influence, but parallel development, at the exact same moment in history. That should stop us in our tracks, because it means humans across the globe, in supposedly entirely isolated regions, all reached large-scale urban complexity within a few centuries of each other. How is this possible? Well, traditionally, this has been chalked up to climate. The standard explanation says that as the Ice Age ended, climates warmed, agriculture flourished, populations grew, and eventually, cities and states emerged wherever the conditions allowed. But all these civilizations emerging at extremely similar times still feels odd. So maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not, why did civilization appear in so many places at once, but rather, what if it didn't? What if we're only seeing the fragments that survived? What if the roots of civilization are much older, not just in the Andes, but all over the world, and we're only just beginning to uncover them? Because the more we dig, the more the timeline stretches. Sites keep getting older, cultures keep looking more complex, and this pattern isn't limited to South America, it's global. Which brings us back to that classic story that civilization was a byproduct of the climate, that as the Ice Age thawed, humans finally had the stability to settle, farm, and build. But new discoveries are beginning to challenge that narrative. Firstly, evidence is pushing the origins of agriculture back well beyond the standard 10,000 BC timeline. At Ohalo-2 in Israel, dated to around 23,000 years ago, we find traces of early plant cultivation, grinding tools, and even structures, clear signs of sedentary life during the peak of the last ice age. In China, similarly ancient grinding stones suggest the processing of wild cereals as far back as 23,000 years ago. While these practices likely weren't yet on a large scale, they prove that the knowledge and behavior required for agriculture existed long before the climate turned favorable. Secondly, from sites like Göbekli Tepe, dated to around 9600 BC, and the broader Taş-Tepeler culture in modern-day Turkey, we now know that complex, megalithic architecture was also already being built before the Neolithic Revolution. So if humans had the ability to cultivate crops and the capability to construct monumental architecture, both during the end of the last ice age, then we have to ask, where did these skills come from? How long have we had them? And if they were already present, why did it take thousands of years for civilization to suddenly emerge around 3000 BC? And why does it all seem to bloom at once, after such a long delay? Unless, of course, the delay is an illusion, and we're just missing the parts of the story we haven't found yet. We keep asking why civilization arose in so many places seemingly at once. But maybe that's the wrong question entirely. Maybe it didn't. Maybe the real issue is how we've chosen to define civilization. For too long, our definition has been narrow. Cities, kings, writing, bureaucracy, the hallmarks of empire. Anything that didn't leave behind palaces or tablets was dismissed as pre-civilized. But what if that's not just wrong? What if it's blinding us? Because when you strip away the bias towards civilization being based on the old model of Mesopotamia, you start to see something else. Long-term settlement, engineered landscapes, complex social organization, spiritual expression, symbolic carvings and thinking. These aren't the marks of primitive people. They're the foundation stones of civilization itself. And these foundations show up everywhere. In the intricate earthworks of the Amazon, in the forgotten urban networks of Southeast Asia, in the ancient star maps of Aboriginal Australia, in the ceremonial architecture of pre-agricultural Anatolia. Different materials, different languages, different outcomes, but the same underlying impulse to build, to remember, to create something lasting. So maybe civilization wasn't a sudden invention that spread from a single source. Maybe it was an emergent human pattern, one that began much earlier, developed differently, and left behind traces we've only just begun to recognize. So the question isn't just when did it begin, it's how much of it have we missed? Maybe, just maybe, the ruins we found are not just the beginning of something, but the survivors of something older, a lost chapter in the human story we're only just beginning to uncover. And that brings us back to Penico. This newly revealed city doesn't prove any of what I've just said. It's quietly tucked into a hillside in Peru and may seem like just another archaeological dig, but it's not. It's a window, a glimpse into a world that keeps getting older and more complex, and hints at how much we've forgotten. Whether you believe this is part of a larger, lost global network, or simply another piece in the mosaic of ancient South American civilization, the implications are enormous. Penico isn't just some ruins in the dirt, it's further proof that people of this region were building, organizing, trading, and worshipping in complex ways thousands of years earlier than was previously thought. It's a reminder that history is not a fixed story, it's alive. And every time we peel back another layer of Earth, we're faced with the same haunting question. What else is out there that we have missed? Whatever the answer is, one thing is clear. Discoveries like Penico don't just add details to our past, they can help change the story entirely. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why history is so fascinating. So I've just launched a brand new Patreon, so check that out below for loads of bonus content and to help support my work. Please let me know what you think in the comments, thanks for watching, and as ever, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to my channel.